So this is something I've wanted to talk about since forever, ever since Battlefront 2 came out. Battlefront 2, no matter its eventual comeback, will be remembered for how it launched, as a loot box gambling casino. I've heard that there's actually still people who complain about loot boxes, oblivious to what the game is like today. But there's something about the game that will always be garbage. The single-player campaign. I think given the improvements made to the multiplayer, people have forgotten about the campaign. The only update the campaign got was an expansion way back when, at the game's first update, the Last Jedi expansion. The campaign is a watered-down, poorly written, Disney-fied abortion that further proved the failure of the Sequel Trilogy. Given how this campaign is supposed to tie in with The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, any criticisms I had about Fallen Order were nothing compared to this campaign. It goes beyond a bad story. This campaign also has problems with level design, AI encounters, difficulty, and so much more. Today, we will look at the Battlefront 2 campaign and tear it apart. I think it's important to discuss the original Battlefront 2 first. Battlefront 2 is one of the greatest Star Wars games ever made, and the second most highly played when the original Xbox Live was shutting down. The first being Halo 2 in case you're curious. There's good reason for that. Star Wars Battlefront 2 is a game that turns the spectacle and battles of Star Wars into a video game. It was glorious. While Battlefront is essentially a Battlefield clone, that didn't mean it was a lesser game. People loved that it was Battlefield Star Wars. The campaign is probably one of the greatest written stories that relies solely on narration for its presentation. Tamara Norrison really knocked it out of the park, and the writers gave very interesting insights onto how clones viewed the original Skywalker saga. Not without its criticisms, of course, but on the other hand, Battlefront 2 is a masterpiece of a Star Wars game in the third-person shooter genre. Then 7 years after the game released, George Lucas sold Star Wars to Disney for a dirt cheap price, and the dark times were upon us. Disney, who didn't give two shits about the integrity of Star Wars, gave the license to Electronic Arts after shutting down LucasArts. They could not have picked a worse publisher, and the decision came from total ignorance, laziness, and greed. Disney themselves don't seem to give a fuck about the gaming market. But EA themselves, despite acquiring the license, cared even less about using Star Wars as a cash cow. First there was Galaxy of Heroes, which was just another bullshit mobile game, and then their first AAA release was the dust of bones piece of shit game, known as Battlefront 2015. The fact that EA had the balls to name it after the original classic franchise is shady in of itself, but the nail that seals the fucking coffin is the fact that this was probably the most disappointing Star Wars game release ever, topping that of The Force Unleashed 2. A game that I've actually come to appreciate over time because the Lucas era content was so much better. Battlefront 2015 has quite possibly one of the stupidest business schemes of the decade. On top of no Clone Wars, no Galactic Conquest, no campaign, the game locks half of its content behind a season pass that didn't even tell you what kind of maps it would have. 4 planets at launch, terrible flight controls, shitty voice acting for the heroes and villains, except for Boba Fett. Tam always does a good job. This game was a total rip-off, and I feel really bad for you if you spent your own pocket money for this game. You have my sympathies in advance. How could the developers of the Battlefield series make such a fucking stripped game based on their own franchise? It just baffles me. Anyways, with the bar set so low and little of the game to praise given it cut out a lot of features, there was hope on the horizon 2 years later. When The Last Jedi was being hyped up, I was excited despite the disappointment that was The Force Awakens, because this Rian Johnson guy was directing it, and people seemed to like his other films like Looper. What a naive little shithead I was. On top of that, EA seemingly got their shit together and announced Battlefront 2. They promised 3 times the amount of content at launch, all 3 eras of Star Wars based on the films, and a campaign? Holy shit, I couldn't believe it. Say what you will about the product at launch, but whoever marketed this game was an evil mastermind who tricked almost everyone. I remember having a look at the trailer and oh my god, it was so glorious. The presentation was so good. An Imperial perspective set after Return of the Jedi that was going to fill the gap where The Force Awakens did not. Oh my god, that's fucking awesome. The Untold Soldier's story? Holy shit. I love the dialogue in this trailer. That's the point, Sergeant. We avenge our Emperor. Hope cannot save them. Like, my god, I thought for a second that they got some of the best writers in the industry for those lines. Given the promises of the campaign, I was pumped. Disney released a tie-in novel that released before the game came out that I actually got and read beginning to end, even though I wasn't much of a reader. To sum up my thoughts on the novel, I barely remember much from it. But I chalked that up to being because I didn't read much books in the first place. I was still excited for this new story that hyped itself up as a revolutionary new story as it proclaimed itself. Like it actually seemed to be covering new ground with the Imperial perspective. The original Battlefront II covered the original saga minus Return of the Jedi, while this game was going to cover Return of the Jedi onwards. So that could be sort of a pseudo-sequel to the original Battlefront II campaign, and given how the main character Iden Versio wasn't a clone, this also made a fresh spin to the whole thing. The whole time, they were just hyping up the campaign. I particularly remember this promotional featurette where they basically go full-on Imperial sympathizers.
I've always been a fan of the dark side. The idea of the Imperial perspective is you never really understand who they are as people, right? How the organization works. How can we distill that and how can we make a story around that?
What's really exciting about this story is that we're going to see it from the point of view of a character like Iden. So we're going to see it from this Imperial point of view.
You're a liar! You're a liar!
Iden is a tried and true Imperial.
You know something that you're not telling us, you slimy scumbag liar!
We have to take risks, we have to be bold, we have to push everyone's boundaries and leave a good footprint behind.
Liar! Tell us what you know, you goddamn liar!
Yeah, they do sound enthusiastic about the story they were telling. That they'd hype up the campaign as much as the multiplayer. Usually when developers hype up a game, they tend to be enthusiastic about a game, no matter its final quality, and they do this to sell you the product and act like they care. Why I thought they cared this time is that studios who make shooters don't tend to hype up the campaign quite as much. They tend to talk about it to a minor extent and focus on the multiplayer. So this gave me a false sense of security that this story would be worth a shit. When the later trailers came out, I started having self-concerns that the campaign would have Iden defect to the rebellion. But I figured that even EA and Disney wouldn't come up with an idea that dumb. Star Wars desperately needed some quality stories after the Disney purchase, and there was no way in hell this story could be terrible. Not with everything going for it, and the stakes being that high for Battlefront II not being a bomb as a whole. They had to get the campaign and the multiplayer right. So this game released roughly a month before The Last Jedi. And what did I think of it? Did I think it's bad? No, it isn't bad.
It's fucking horrible!
It's an insulting, boring, shallow mess. I'd be lying if I said it was inoffensive. Oh no, it certainly stings. And I'll explain why when we get into it. I'm also going to go into the entire campaign beginning to end and rip it apart. Are you ready? Here we go. Okay, so it says a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, but then immediately cuts into the story. Where's the opening text crawl? I'm fucking sick of the lack of opening text crawls. It's hard to get excited for a Star Wars story if there's no title crawl. Get us hyped. Plus, it makes it easier for the writers to set up any story. Use it for fuck's sake. Okay, so given the lack of a text crawl, the story has to set itself up with dialogue and presentation. And this is a great weakness. Many say that the campaign actually starts strong, but personally I disagree. Like, there's no actual hook or introduction or anything going on that gets the player excited. The story starts with rebel troopers telling us about a hardcore special forces soldier, and they just go on and on about Iden being special forces. Not once did I get the impression that Iden was actually special in her abilities or as a soldier. Like, the design for Inferno's squad is literally shiny black-red TIE fighter armor. It's unoriginal and hollow. I don't think the first cutscene properly sets up the story. Like, the rebels enter a cell, and we get some cookie dialogue from the rebel officer, which feels like the most cliche thing ever, like they went out of their way to be that unoriginal in how the rebel officer communicated to Iden. And then our first contrivance arises. The fact that the rebels literally put her helmet in the cell with her, which is stupid as shit, because something like this would probably happen if you didn't confiscate all of her equipment. How is the helmet even turned on? Even if you had no room on the ship to put the helmet other than Iden's cell, why the fuck didn't you guys turn it off? This leads to the droid Iden possesses, which is literally only called droid by Iden in most of the game. Like, she later calls it Dio, but I don't remember a name during the main campaign. As I said, she just calls it droid. To be fair, the droid's perspective is okay. Had the start been a lot better, it would have made for a more memorable moment. So since the rebels are idiots, Iden escapes, and we get our first taste of gameplay. Essentially, rebel soldiers are the only enemy, which, you know, that's a perfectly normal level, but literally the entire game has the same boring consequences. It's literally trooper after trooper after trooper. One of the first pieces of foreshadowing on how shallow this story will be is fan service of Admiral Akbar addressing rebel soldiers on the attack of the second Death Star. Never once leading up to the Battle of Endor did I get the feeling of chills or anything like I knew where this was going. I was sort of like, okay, the whole way through. Plus, I don't think this story establishes characters in the conflict that well. Just like everything else Disney puts out, it expects you to know all these details. Like, if you want characterization, you'll have to read the prequel novel. The stealth is absolutely retarded, and feels like the bare minimum from a design standpoint. We mowed down rebels essentially, and granted, I suck at most shooters, but this is way too easy, and at some points way too hard. There's a lot of inconsistent gaps in difficulty encounters, and it makes the game feel disjointed on top of the bad story. You do get some abilities like an electric shock to your enemy by your droid, but the problem is that when you activate it, it takes your droid far too long to actually reach the target and electrocute it. Half the time, I just end up shooting the enemy before the droid even has a goddamn chance to do as I commanded. And Jesus, I know this is a rebel ship, but you couldn't make it any wider than this. So the mission ends with Iden Versio going to the pressure chamber and ejects herself into space. Throughout the mission, our objective was to destroy Imperial intel so that the Emperor's trap could go as planned. During the eject, Iden's ship, the Corvus, jumps out of hyperspace and Iden lands perfectly into the hangar without breaking a single bone. I struggle to buy that the Corvus would be that accurate. Given how the first mission's already over, and it's only now that we're being properly introduced to Iden's squad mates, Del Miko and Gideon Husk, and the only moment of real interaction in the whole game is present, where these characters briefly talk about past events, and then they go back to talking about the trap they set for the rebellion.
Today, the rebellion dies.
And that's it. That's how the story starts. A weak opening cutscene, a lack of context, brief characterization, and no motivation or really anything is set up. It's so damn lackluster. I think we should have spent more time setting up the story. Look at any other shooter that has a good story. They all establish the story by setting up characters, a conflict, motivation, reasoning, and whatnot. So far, I don't care a single bit about Inferno Squad. Iden Versio has absolutely no personality aside from being a hardcore Special Forces Imperial, and Miko and Husk are pretty much the same. It's impossible to distinguish these characters aside from the way they look. If the Bad Batch were bad because they were stereotypes with no actual personality, Inferno Squad is bad because they barely have any character. I think setting up to the Battle of Endor, we should have established these three characters and their motivations. Since this was marketed as an Imperial perspective, I want to hear why these characters believe in the Empire over the Rebellion. With Husk, for example, in external material, it's confirmed that Husk's parents were killed in a rebel attack when he was 10, and the game doesn't even bother to mention this. Go read the books for that information instead. All we really need to know about these characters are that they are hardcore Special Forces soldiers. That's it. You see, the actor man said it best when he explained that the story discusses the what instead of the why. What this means is that it's much more interesting to discuss why something is happening more than just what is happening. Like, this story could have taken the time to explain why Iden and the others believe in the Empire, why they prefer the Empire to the Rebellion, why they are so confident that the Emperor's trap will work, why the Death Star 2 actually means something to them, and so on. Like, imagine if the story started with a title crawl, and we got some insight into Iden's personality through the first cutscene. Like, we could have had some dialogue setting up that the Empire is laying a trap for the Rebellion, but from the Imperial perspective. We show how confident the Empire is that the plan will work, which will add for a bigger payoff when the Death Star 2 is destroyed, like it was in Return of the Jedi. Since the original Battlefront 2 was from the perspective of a single clone trooper in the 501st, we could have had more Imperials discuss their thoughts in this game. Like, Iden's father is an Imperial Admiral. So what I mean is that I also want some insight into the high-ranking Imperial. Since Admiral Versio is a leader at the Battle of Endor, I want the game to explore Admiral Versio's outlook on the world. I wanted all the Imperial characters' insights. Also, another issue with the story is the awkward structure. Like, Iden goes from saying,
Today, the rebellion dies.
and then cuts to the middle of the Battle of Endor, which the transition is so awful. What I think would have been better is the entire battle from Iden's perspective. Like, let the battle play out from the Empire's point of view. On top of explaining why these characters want the rebellion defeated, we could have heavily mimicked Return of the Jedi, and had the entirety of the battle shown to us, but we're fighting for the Empire. So basically, we kill some more rebels, and then we've got a cutscene where the Death Star 2 is destroyed. And like what I said earlier, there's no depth to the whole thing. Iden just says, let's grieve later, we've got a job to do. This would have been the perfect opportunity for the game to explain why this was a surprise, and on the objectives, why these characters are so motivated to continue their mission, why the Death Star was destroyed, and so on. Like, there's hardly a taste of Imperial reactions to them being essentially screwed. The Stormtroopers have less personality than the Stan Lee cameos in every Marvel movie individually until his death. Like, we barely get an established connection to these Stormtroopers and a reason to care about why they survived the mission. So since the story is drab at this point, does it get any better? Hell no! We just get to the TIE Fighters, and had the story been written better, the wreckage would have been more impactful. I think what they should have done is further establish why the Death Star's destruction makes them upset. Like, maybe Husk or Miko discusses colleagues on board the Death Star, and panics and wonders if they made it out in time. Maybe that would have made this scene more effective. We go on to defend Admiral Versio, and I've made it clear in other videos that I hate defending weak-ass allies in games. This is no exception. The next scene has Iden talk to her father about the state of the Empire.
The Emperor is dead.
So what happens now?
Are you kidding me? Once again, the plot keeps on being about what's going on instead of why it's going on. Like, this should have been a massive shocker, but it results in nothing but mild surprise. It's lame as shit. Now another missed opportunity is setting the stakes of the story, like expand on the position the Empire is in. They were winning the war at one point, but now they're losing, and they cannot afford to hold out as much as they could given how many Imperials have since given up on the Empire and joined the New Republic. Like when you think about it, the Empire are actually the rebellion now, and the rebels are the superpower. This could actually make a good loop in the story. Once you were winning, but now you are losing and must fight against near impossible odds. The Empire is holding much as they can, so Admiral Versio shares a message with Iden from a red droid with the Emperor's face on it, telling the both of them about Operation Cinder, which at this point of the story, we don't exactly know what Operation Cinder even is. While the mystery element is perfectly acceptable, what it leads to is horrible, but I'm getting ahead of myself. We get a space mission over the planet Fondor, where we have to secure the satellites that will be used for Operation Cinder. Of course, it's still what instead of why. Then in one of the biggest disappointments in a shooter campaign, we get to play as Luke Skywalker shortly after Return of the Jedi.
Oops!
I'll be fine, R2. You stay here, all right?
Well, now I can talk about something positive. They really nailed the writing for Luke Skywalker, and it stands out amongst the bland-ass story of Iden. But there's a catch. These guest player character levels presumably only exist to promote the multiplayer by saying, hey, if you love Luke Skywalker in the campaign, you'll certainly want to jerk off to him in the multiplayer. Also, around 30 to 40% of the campaign are missions where you don't play as Iden. And given how we're playing as Luke Skywalker here, it doesn't do the Imperial perspective justice because we're playing as a fucking rebel now. And since this mission is from Luke's perspective, given how we're playing as him, it's a complete disconnect. Like, not that they were actually exploring the Imperial perspective one bit, but this certainly shoots the story in the foot and stops it in its tracks. Now, I haven't played as Luke Skywalker in the multiplayer, and I doubt I will given how the game is dying by the population, given the lack of updates and the game drying out. But the lightsaber combat is just as strange as Actman described it. They didn't patch a single thing to make the campaign even slightly better. The combat has these awkward pauses, and it's basically just a load of spam. Now the thing is, Luke Skywalker kills all the stormtroopers mercilessly, and then we come across Del, who was sent on a mission here along with the garrison he brought with him. The same garrison we just killed. Now what's strange is that Del holds little resentment to Luke for killing the entire garrison he just brought along with him. It's basically a throwaway line after Luke frees Del, and they decide to work together to get to the Emperor's vault. Like, Jesus, Del never considers that Luke is actually just playing nice to lure him to the Emperor's vault? Where's the caution? Like, wouldn't the Empire have told him growing up that the Jedi were manipulative liars, and that's why they tried to overthrow the Senate according to Palpatine? On the gameplay side of things, we have to fight bugs, which is all we do get to fight after killing Del Meeko's garrison. Endless bugs spawn and we kill them all. The problem is that these writers and designers have such fucking uncreative fucking minds. We're on this visually stunning looking planet, and the best thing you can come up with for fauna is bugs? Did these writers go out of their way to fucking bore the player? If so, mission accomplished. Like, seriously, you could not have come up with a worse enemy than T-posing bugs. Well, anyways, we get to the vault, and Luke takes something and Del lets him keep it. Still not considering Luke may be deceiving him. Well, anyways, they go outside and talk about choosing your destiny, blah 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 blah. I think people were so desperate to find positives that this passingly okay scene is considered a highlight of the campaign. I mean, Luke is written faithfully, with not a single hint of what he'll become in The Last Jedi, which did make for a rude surprise back in the day. So eventually, we get an explanation of what Operation Cinder is, and it makes the whole story fall apart. Now, so far, this story has been a boring ass schlock, but it didn't particularly offend. Well, now it fucking stings! It turns out that Operation Cinder is quite possibly the stupidest fucking idea Palpatine ever came up with. Basically, in the Shattered Empire comics, the Empire tried glassing vital worlds not to the rebellion, but to their own territory, with the delusional idea that fear will spread and the Empire will secure control. Those satellites will be used to glass planets loyal to the Empire. And her father, because he's a total retard, just spouts the stupid logic I just discussed. Like first, where were those satellites when they were obviously a cheaper option than the Death Star? Why did you need the Death Star when you could have just blockaded any world and just glassed it? Now, many agree the Death Star should have been scrapped from the get-go, but now since we have this obviously smaller and cheaper option, what the fuck is wrong with the Empire? You all know how much I hate the villain kills his own men cliche. This is that same trope on steroids. Now maybe this isn't the fault of the Battlefront II writers per se. It should probably be blamed on the idiot who wrote Shattered Empire, or maybe it should be blamed on J.J. Abrams, because this was all supposed to lead into The Force Awakens. Whoever's fault this is a massive plot hole and fuck you. Now obviously, being a cheaper option aside, Palpatine is no longer a mastermind. Let's take what happens in The Rise of Skywalker into account on top of this. What exactly was the Emperor trying to do? How did he get the resources and money for these Death Star destroyers if he decided it was a good idea glassing rich and loyal Imperial worlds? On top of the films leaving these stupid plot holes, Operation Cinder pours salt on the existing bullet wound. This makes absolutely no sense. Did Emperor Palpatine destroy the Empire on purpose? Why would he do that? Given how the Empire still could have won after Endor, why did he wait 30 years to come out of hiding? Why not just come back immediately? If he was still alive, he easily could have done this. Or if he was still incapable of moving from that crane thing, scheme like you did from the very beginning. And this makes me wonder, where the fuck did Snoke come from? Why did he need the First Order? Questions that are never answered are made worse by this game. J.J. Abrams, it seems, was so desperate to sell tickets for the failing sequel trilogy. It's just so bizarre. The no plan argument works wonders here, because it's absolutely valid and true. Well, with that tangent out of the way, Inferno Squad is sent down to Vardos to secure an alien called Gleb, who is vital to the Empire for a reason I couldn't be fucked remembering. If it was answer at all, because it's what over why. Yep, I've been waiting God knows how long at this point, but the main selling point is practically a lie. This is not an Imperial perspective. This is an Imperial turns rebel story. That is so hollow and cliche that I couldn't believe how poorly written this was. The very first reveal trailer says that this was the untold soldier story, when it's actually the opposite. It's a cliche, boring story. They really thought this story was special, didn't they? Why did they falsely market this game when what they marketed was so much cooler than what was given? My theory is Disney's interference. The marketing team probably realized the story was so shit that they had to make it out to be something it was not. Very deceptive, very slimy. I don't think this received as much attention as it should have, given how loot box were the main talk of the game. In my opinion, EA and Disney deserve to be heavily ridiculed for a falsely marketed campaign as well. But when it comes to falsely marketing a story, there's loopholes, because Disney could just say, well, you did see the Empire's perspective for a bit, and we never said this would be a full Empire story, which I refuse to buy because you damn well knew what impression you gave people. As well as this, the motivation is shallow as shit, writing-wise and in-universe wise. Like, Iden did not shed a single tear over Alderaan. Why does she care about Vardos then? Because it's her home? Wow, Iden is such a shallow person. When it's not her planet, she's fine with it. But if it's her planet, then that's where she draws the line. There was also zero build-up. It happens. Seriously, did these fuckers ever watch the original trilogy, The Force Unleashed, or basically anything with a character's change of heart? This plot point not only insults the player's fucking intelligence because of the false marketing and lack of build-up, but it also makes Iden a dislikable shallow main character without an ounce of likability. So now that we're a fucking rebel, provided you didn't throw your controller at the TV at this point, which if you didn't, you deserve a medal. Anyways, it's stormtroopers we have to fight now, and given the false marketing, it's not something you can enjoy. And if you enjoyed being lied to, you can fuck off. Basically, we fight through Imperials, and we get into an AT-AT which, unlike Fallen Order, is so drab that you'd rather sit in a prison cell for 20 fucking years. Essentially, we get on board the Corvus and fly away from the system. So anyways, with that being said, Iden and Del decide to give themselves up to the rebellion, where we meet Lando and Shriv, the second being the only good new character in this game. Granted, the character should have had some sort of accent or distinct voice, but he's such a sarcastic, funny guy with charisma that all the other characters lack. Lando automatically trusts these ex-Imperials that were hardcore special forces 2 missions ago, which makes Lando stupid. Like seriously, I agree with Shriv here. I'm not sure I even trust them despite playing from Iden's perspective. So essentially the next target in Operation Cinder is Naboo. And after a drawn out flying section, we get our next cameo, Leia Organa. We easily could have played as Iden in this mission, but we don't. And well, Leia is faithfully written, and thank God we don't have to play as the underdeveloped Iden for this fucking mission, but the writers ideally shouldn't do this, but they do, and Leia is boring to play as. She's essentially similar to Iden play-wise. I couldn't notice the goddamn difference, in the slightest. I guess the environment is pretty cool, and one of the only main positives are the graphics. But graphics doesn't make much for this garbage campaign. Again, it's just stormtroopers you fight. This is so fucking boring. Let's just skip to the end of the level, which basically consists of Leia pointing out to Iden and Del that they have caused great harm to the Alliance, and Iden talks about how they were fighting for the wrong side all this time, which is a line so fucking insulting given the marketing. Then Leia just brushes it off in the next line and tells them they are the reason hope can prevail. Like seriously, the rebellion just accepts them into their ranks without a second thought. Like, wouldn't the defection process be judged a little more carefully? Because you don't want spies or saboteurs into the rebellion. And like, the next scene has Iden and Leia talk like they're the best of friends, and again, the transactions of these scenes are so awkward. There's literally no character development between these two characters. I also love how casually Iden talks about hunting down Imperial fleets, like she doesn't give a single fuck about what happens to all the potential friends and comrades she left in the Empire. This is so unrealistic and poorly written. So basically, to set up the next fucking cameo, because Luke, Leia, and Lando weren't enough, we now get introduced to Han Solo, captain of the Millennium Falcon. And where else to play as Han Solo but Taco Dama? Seriously, I think these writers overestimate my love for The Force Awakens, and when I say love, I mean not at all. So basically, this ugly beardo Han Solo is talking to Maz Kanata, who sounds absolutely nothing like she does in the sequel trilogy. Like, obviously this isn't Harrison Ford speaking as Han Solo, but you couldn't do any better for Maz. And just like Halo 5, there are talking segments to pad out the game. And the same is true for Battlefront 2, where you have to locate a defecting Imperial pilot or something to gather intel on the Wookiee homeworld for Chewbacca. So you basically have to ask around and figure out who's who. And as a Han Solo trope on top of that, you mow down stormtroopers without a care in the world. Jesus Christ. Han Solo plays okay. I mean, you feel enough like Han Solo and the writing is accurate for the character, but given the gameplay's the damn same, it makes this level tiresome. Will you give us something new for fuck's sake? I absolutely hated this mission. Stormtroopers are so tiresome, and let me tell you, it's like that for the whole campaign. We get to fly the Millennium Falcon, that's something I guess. Next mission, we have to go to Cloud City, and this is where I really get sick of playing this story mode. The story as a whole basically failed to get any better. It's still what's going on instead of why it's going on. We kill some stormtroopers and take their armor as we walk past Imperials, openly speaking against the Empire in front of other stormtroopers. I'm going to be super generous here and assume whoever wrote the damn script intended for there to be no one around when this was being said, and that the level designers put enemies around the player when adapting the script to gameplay. It turns out that the whole thing is a trap set by Husk. Husk himself is a shitty antagonist. I did not feel a single ounce of emotion for the splitting up of Inferno Squad because we barely know the guy. Bantering stormtroopers had more personality than this shithead. On top of that, I think I owe an apology to the writers of Fallen Order when I said the second sister came across like a smug shit talker. I didn't know what I was talking about, because Husk is exactly what I described the second sister as times infinity. There's not even a rivalry that develops throughout the game. Husk is just a hurdle that stands in your way. That's it. We essentially have to fight our way to these stupid cloud cars, and they essentially have laser turrets on them for some reason, and we fly towards 3 Star Destroyers and blow them up. Sounds exciting? Well, you should know better by now. It's still what instead of why. Ugh. I am so done with this campaign, but I have yet a lot more to talk about. If you thought that was the end of the guest appearance missions, get your head checked, cause we're playing as Lando now. You know, to be fair, playing as these characters is a blessing because we don't play as the shallow idiot Iden all the time. Still, this mission is the same damn thing, for fuck's sake. Lando accompanies Shrev to this Imperial refinery on Sullus and end up burning everything. I guess the banter is good, but given how this is such a hollow story, it only stands out because it's not shit. Well, anyways, it's time to finish the fight. Except it's not all that exciting. I only played that Halo 2 gag because I wanted to avoid boring myself to death. In concept, the Battle of Jakku level is cool, but given how you shoot the same enemy types you did in the first level, plus some ATSTs and AT-ATs, this level is boring as the rest. You know, one of the promises of the campaign was that it would give some insight into what happened after Return of the Jedi. Well, let me say firsthand, it doesn't. It does not at all properly explain what happened. It just has Iden participating in battles. I guess the most we see is that the Empire tried Operation Cinder, which backfired spectacularly. This is probably because, once again, the answer is what over why. This game doesn't answer or give nuance to a single damn thing. So with that being said, Iden shoots enemies just like we would in any other mission. And then in a cool little twist, the final boss, Husk, is the enemy we have to defeat in a dogfight. Given how space battles were agreed to be better than land battles at launch, this was probably the few things they got right. After defeating Husk, Iden decides to get to her father, and it's a waste of time because he feels he deserves to die on the battlefield. This final meeting is hollow as shit, given how there was no development between the two. Nothing about how either cared about the other. Just dialogue that served to continue the fucking story. No personal moments or anything like that. I mean, not that these characters interacted much at all, but still. Iden gets into an escape pod, and Del gets out explaining that the Empire has been defeated at last. Then out of nowhere, the game forces a romance between Iden and Del. There was absolutely no chemistry from these two characters. They just wanted to have a romance subplot just because. I think there might have been some personal attraction from Del's end in the prequel book, but that is no excuse for the game itself not telling or showing us the romance. Not at all. I don't buy this one bit. Shrev, who barely counts as an Inferno Squad teammate, looks on with Iden and Del, and then, decades later, this is the most awkward transition yet, especially when the very next scene is completely different in tone. Now we've got Del as an old man, with Kylo Ren probing his mind because he knows where Lord Santeca hid the map to Skywalker. Oh. So that's how the First Order found Lord Santeca in The Force Awakens. Too bad it gives zero explanation on how Del knows Lord Santeca, or how he knows about the map, and given we don't even know why the map exists, it gives this actually creative level less character. The Mind Probe mission is where we play as Kylo Ren as we go into Del's mind, and we actually get some history of this dude. Shame we had to wait till the very end of the fucking game. In fact, it almost feels like they wrote this story just for the ending. Now obviously, a well-known writing quote is begin with the end in mind, but the thing is, where the fuck's the rest of the story? Because this isn't even a story, it's just a fan-servicey, cookie-cutter mess. After Kylo Ren is done probing Del, guess who shows up? Why, it's none other than Husk.
No way!
With no explanation on how he survived with a crashed ship, Husk scolds Del for letting him down, which the scene would be worth a shit if they actually explored the two characters. So the main campaign ends with a crappy cliffhanger, with Husk killing Del and Gleb? Whatever. At least the main story's over. Is what I would be saying if they didn't release an expansion the day The Last Jedi came out. Well, at least it was free along with the multiplayer crate map, so we're not fucking done yet. So the campaign was garbage, and the ambiguous ending with the mention of Iden and Del's daughter inspired players to make another fan theory on who Rey's parents were. Like we needed another one of those. And another rant about Star Wars Explained. He made one of his debunking theory videos and argued that people would be confused if they announced that Iden and Del were confirmed to be Rey's parents, given not everyone plays video games, as if Disney actually gives a fuck about confusing the audience. Fucking idiot. End of rant. So The Last Jedi comes out, it was horrible, and it violated many childhoods. And it's not like the expansion put the taste of shit out of my mouth. Also, I can't believe they actually thought Iden's story was worth continuing. No one cared. At least it was free. I couldn't bear the thought of anyone paying for this shit stain. So anyways, after a recap, Iden Versio is reintroduced to us. And oh no, her daughter isn't Rey. It's this fuckwit that got the worst genetic traits of both Iden and Del, making her a damn ugly woman. The problem right off the bat is that it feels like only a few things changed after 30 years. Iden and Del got married, they had this hideous creature, and that's about it. Shriv is right here like nothing ever happened. None of the returning characters have changed a bit. Too bad, because it was so terrible in the main campaign. Iden is looking for her husband, and Shriv has a lead on where Del might be. Del was basically investigating the First Order on Project Resurrection, whatever the hell that is. Basically, they go to the Athula system and get attacked by a Janata security fleet. And then they are defeated and admit to kidnapping children for the First Order, and that the planet of operations is Vardos. Of course it is. Well, anyways, they make it to Vardos, and Iden and Shriv come across that Gleb alien's dead body, with Husk basically revealing that he killed her, and Del, and that the lights in the sky were the First Order destroying the Hosnian system. You know, one of the things I wanted this campaign to explain is how the First Order came about, and that of course doesn't happen. Bloody hell. Well, anyways, Husk gets away, and oh boy, another shitty shooting sequence. No, getting on walkers doesn't help stave off my boredom. We basically have to get to Zay, who we should find in an escape pod before the First Order does. I don't give a single shit about Zay, and I don't care one bit whether she lives or dies. Well, basically we find her, and then we have to get into TIE fighters and pretend to be part of the First Order. We shoot into the ship Husk is on, and enter it through the engine. We shoot at more bad guys, and do the lousiest defending ally segment that is in a video game. And to cap things off, we have Husk die like a little bitch with Iden Versio dying, and Zay crying. Oh boo-hoo. Zay and Shriv are then told to find more allies, and so that's it. That's the end of the campaign. This campaign was 4 hours plus 1 if you include the expansion. What a lazy, poorly written piece of shit. Where do I even begin? This is quite possibly one of the worst Star Wars video game stories of the last 25 years. Dark Forces 2 might have been undercooked, but I absolutely gave a fuck to what the hell was going on. Hopefully I've made it clear that this is a garbage campaign. You might ask why I'm critiquing it in the first place with such passion. Well, that's because I had faith that this story would blow me away. I was so hyped for a revolutionary Imperial perspective, and that of course didn't happen. It was falsely marketed, and I am never letting Disney, EA, and DICE off the hook ever for trying to sell me a story that never existed. Shame on them. So to sum it all up, there's false marketing, no depth, a main character who was a shallow idiot, poorly written side stories aside from the film characters, except Kylo Ren, he's still shit. I despise this campaign with a burning passion, especially since Disney can still pretend that they've done the Imperial perspective already. This feels like the bare minimum they could do after the original reboot disaster that had no campaign. They were so goddamn lazy. Is there anything that can be salvaged from this abortion of a story? Maybe Shriv? I'd like to see where he was before this campaign, why he fights for the rebels and so on. Shriv is literally the only good, unique thing from this game. Like, there's a steep level of quality between Shriv and all the other new characters. Shriv is not as charismatic as Lando or Obi-Wan, but he's got something at least. The original Battlefront 2 campaign had an interesting story for its time because of the Imperial perspective with beautiful narration. This wank stain doesn't. Now I'm going to be a little more constructive and discuss what could have been. Given how Disney doesn't even follow their own comics and novels anymore, let's disregard Shattered Empire, Aftermath, and everything else and come up with a story that shows us the perspective of the Empire. A game I think they should have taken inspiration from is Wolfenstein: The New Order. I sucked off that game a million times, but Iden Verso's story could have been similar to that of BJ Blazkowicz, a soldier fighting for a side they believed in that has now lost the war, and they are left to pick up the odds and face the brunt of near impossible odds against a regime that has dominated everything. On top of the New Order explaining why things are happening, playing as BJ is more immersive given his self-monologue. The New Order points out why the Allies lost the war, and shows that many have given up save for a select few, that many decided to move on with their lives, and some of them even joined the regime, and also the flaws the Allies had, that make them closer to the fascists at a closer glance.
They would throw me in the gas chamber just like they did all the others.
None of that has anything to do with me. That's not the America I fought for.
Really? I was little, my mother wanted to take me to the picture show, but we had to go in through the fucking colored entrance. I wanted a hot dog and a lemonade, but the sign says we don't serve Negroes in this establishment. You're a patriot. Blue-eyed, jarhead, motherfucking Nazi-killing patriot that you are, you're still a fucking puppet to the man. You're exactly the kind of guy they ordered in come lynching time. You don't get it, do you? Before all this, before the Germans, before the war, back home, man, you were the Nazis.
Be careful what you call me.
We have a charismatic cast of characters and imposing villains who have monstrous control over the world. Like, there's a lot of parallels you could have here. Maybe Iden could recognize the problem with the Empire was that they were pretty cruel at times, and the rebels won people over because of the Emperor losing his mind, but Iden still believes in the Empire and believes it can be restored, willing to adapt to its mistakes. Show us how the First Order forms, and that they are more than child kidnapping fascists that just exist to be evil. Give a spin to both the Empire and the First Order that makes them relatable. Why did Iden support the Empire to begin with? These are questions worth answering. Humanizing the Galactic Empire is a hard challenge, but if the OG Battlefront 2 could do it, so can this game. I wanted a lot of aspects of the Empire's defeat covered. Have Iden experience friends and comrades lose all hope in the Empire. Put the rebels in a light where they're not so innocent themselves. Like, they're not overtly cruel, obviously, but maybe why many supported the Empire was because it was a unifying force for the galaxy, and Vardos, a relatively loyal world, never suffered under the Empire, where the rebels, on the other hand, were different groups with a common goal. And maybe show us how many rebel leaders are distraught that Mon Mothma enforced her version of the Republic, where some didn't even want the Republic back. Show us that the Empire may have been cruel, but it brought everyone in the galaxy together. Show us how desperately the Empire was trying to keep their units together. Show us that it's not solely simplistic good side versus bad side. And for fuck's sake, make all the missions about Iden, and do not devolve the game into pointless cameos and guest appearances. Luke, Leia, Lando, and Han should all be antagonists at best in this game. Like, point out things how Han and Lando were literally smugglers and criminals before they joined the rebellion, and that the rebellion was lax with who they recruited, which resulted in many inexperienced or corrupt individuals joining the rebellion. Like, don't make any of those for the antagonist, but maybe the main rebel antagonist could be a petty general who violently wipes out Imperials and defies Mon Mothma's instructions to offer every Imperial a surrender pardon. Show us that rebels are not all sunshine and rainbows. I'm spitballing here, but they're more interesting things to look into, right? Because graphics means nothing when the game is flawed as shit. In fact, calling it flawed is generous. It's horrendous garbage. Seriously, this is supposed to be the main tie-in to The Last Jedi, and what a sick sense of foreshadowing, because the following movie was even worse. I mean, this game, or practically any other story that ever existed, wrote Luke more faithfully than The Last Jedi. So the Battlefront 2 campaign is rubbish. It's a disgusting shit stain that further points out the failure of the sequel trilogy, and how fucked up and poorly thought out the entire sequel trilogy has been. Both the sequel trilogy and this single player campaign has only gotten worse now that both are fully released. Disney terribly coordinated their Star Wars timeline, because nothing flows together. It's all clunky and robotic. It's so fucking bad. Hopefully you get the point by now. Many will argue that the Battlefront 2 campaign was just a Disney-fied, boring, embarrassing mess, and I heavily disagree with that. It's so much more. This game was perhaps the main source people will look to when it comes to what happened after Return of the Jedi, given how the sequels didn't bother exploring the universe one bit. This game does a terrible job mapping out the timeline, if at all. So that's my critique of the Star Wars Battlefront 2 campaign. What do you think of this campaign? Do you think it's good? Okay, that's a trick question. Of course nobody likes it. Unless your standards are so low and you're that much of a Disney shill, this story was horrible and a story. I'm JJ Plagiarisms. And until next time, what are stories but mystery boxes?
Water was running, children were running, we found you.
Also, what idiot decided to release a pop Funko of Iden Versio? Who in the fuck gives a shit about her?